you know, the second book just doesn't get the attention as the first one from the, you know, for me, for, you know, like the, you know, I just didn't spend as much time on the, you know, kind of like celebrating, I don't think, as much, and I probably should have.
Well, it's a different experience. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, in some ways it's better that you know what's coming. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, and, you know, some great things will happen, some
Yeah.
medium things will happen, some things won't happen at all. But that, you know, that debut feeling, like right before the debut
Right.
comes
Like
out,
where I
it's
was
just, you
pinching
don't
myself.
know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to expect. And I remember the first, although I still have where I'll go into a bookstore and if I see it there, I'm like so excited. You know, it's like, I don't think that never goes away.
Yeah, it does. It does not. I can tell you 4 books in, it has not gone away so far. So I don't expect that it will. Also, 4 books in, I haven't figured out how to write yet. So I'm still hoping
Oh,
that
I don't
maybe on the
agree with
5th book,
that.
I'll
No, I
get
do
that
not agree with
right.
that. I feel like, you know, I'm just so honored that you even, you know, agreed to appear here. I mean, you're such a hero of mine. The
Oh,
Magician's Lie. The Magician's Lie was a masterpiece. I mean, I loved it. Like I said, I just finished The Arctic Fury, and I love that kind of like confessional kind of unwinding that you do with this, with a historical, you know, fiction story. It's just amazing. And then you
thank you
kind
so
of get to
much.
the end, you know, at the end you're like, wait a minute, what did I just read? You know, it's like it's great. So I'm
Yeah.
just so honored that you're here with me.
Thank you. Awesome. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. We probably, if they let us go on for 6 hours, we probably would, but we're going to have a tight hour today. And sort of, we can always continue the conversation online. But before we get too much deeper into it, do you want to read us a few pages, give us
I
some
would love
vibe,
to.
and let us
Yeah.
know?
So let me, I'm actually going to I'm going to go to chapter 21, and don't be alarmed. I'm not going to, there's really not a lot, there's nothing that's going to be like spoiled. The reason I'm going to go to this chapter, Laura, is the first time that the protagonist, Lara Barnes, sees the circus. And I think that this is probably a very good example of the magic, and it'll kind of give you a good feel, if you haven't read the book, a little bit of a good feel as to what you can kind of expect from the magic. I think that's what folks really kind of like. So I'll just go ahead and start. So it's Paris, July 3rd, 2005. At the foot of the Grand Palais, at the corner of Rue Vivienne and Rue Ramier, Laura looked down at her watch. 5 minutes until 11. The imposing building in front of her was too large to be so quiet. Moonlight illuminated the fronts of the pillars. The waiter at the bistro across the street was stacking chairs in an effort to close. During the day, this part of Paris was buzzing with offices and businesses, but at night it was nearly abandoned. Other than waiters and the occasional couple on their way home, there was nothing here. She looked down at the ticket and confirmed the streets. The courtyard in front of her was empty and dark. She paced, her heels clicking on the cement. Turning, she thought she heard something behind her, footsteps. She kept pacing. If anyone was watching her, she'd pretend like she was waiting for someone. She was waiting for someone. She regretted not telling Gaston what she was doing tonight, but she didn't want to worry him or Barrow. After the woman had chased her, she should have been more careful, although she'd cast the protection spell again tonight before she left the hotel. She looked down at her watch again, 3 minutes until 11. All she had to do was hold this woman off for 3 minutes. Althazar would find her. The night air in Paris was sticky and warm, giving little relief. Feeling the need to dress for the occasion, she'd worn a black dress with strappy sandals like she was going to dinner or a concert. Slung over her arm was a denim jacket. And she heard it again, the clicking of heels, a woman's heels. Laura spun. The noise was coming from the corner near Rue Vivienne where the streetlight was out. She felt a chill run up her neck. Come on, come on. She looked around for something to change. Silently, she began to chant, Vercatus locis tegratato. From a distance, she heard a church bell begin to clang. It was 11. As if her vision were bending, she saw the pillars in front of her warp. At first, it was small, like a ripple when you throw a small stone in the water. Within seconds, the smooth waves became more pronounced, like something was trying to tear through the scene. The streetlights dimmed, making a charged noise as the scene in front of her, the massive building with pillars, gave way. In its place emerged a giant round arena with an opulent gold entrance complete with a devil's open mouth. Laura gasped. The devil's mouth. It was just as Cecile and Barrow had described. Looking back toward Rue Vivienne, she thought she saw the outline of a woman standing under a dead street lamp, waiting. She stared in that direction, letting the woman know she wasn't backing down. Straining her eyes in the dark, Laura couldn't make out if this was the same woman from the Père Lachaise. There was a steady hum as if a fluorescent light had just been turned on after a lengthy recess. 4 sets of pillars led the way to a door. Gaslights illuminated the path. Like a picture coming into focus, the circus with its matinee sign became clear. Laura looked down at her ticket. If she threw the ticket down now and ran, would this scene disappear? Tempting though it was to flee, she stared out at the figure of the woman standing in the shadows. If she didn't go through the doors to the Cirque Secret, then she had to face whoever was out there, knowing it was that woman. No, it was safer to be inside this circus. Blinking, she took the scene in front of her. An entire circus had just materialized in front of her eyes, supplanting a Parisian landmark. Laura looked around. The waiter at the nearby cafe continued to stack chairs as though the entire square had not transformed in front of him. Without a ticket, perhaps it hadn't. For goodness sake, get in or get out. Laura looked around the pillars to find a clown holding a miniature version of himself, a ventriloquist's dummy, Doro. From Cecile's journal, Laura felt she already knew him. Yes, you! The clowns were dressed identically, all in white, from the face paint to the fez hat to the costume. Above her, a horse whinnied. Was the statue alive as well? Amazed, she spun around, not unlike Dorothy, who had just entered Oz. Ms. Barnes, the dummy's hand pointed to the door. This way, s'il vous plaît. As the clown walked, the dummy peered around him. I am Doro, or he is. The little wooden hand pointed up to the clown, who held out his hand to claim her ticket. She was reluctant to give it up. The ticket does not belong to you, snapped the dummy. It was the same dread she felt entering a fake haunted house for Halloween. She expected to be entertained, yet there was a foreboding sense in the background. Laura nodded and handed the larger clown the ticket and watched as it melted into his hand. As she stepped onto the carpet, it rolled up behind her, giving her the sinking feeling that perhaps the ticket was one way.
Oh, I love that. It's wonderful. That's such a powerful scene. And you also start with a very sort of powerful scene that's not quite as dramatic, but one of the things that's wonderful about the way that you're using magic here is it's so ordinary. It's just magic is part of it. She casts a protection spell, and in the beginning of that powerful image that the book starts with, she's remaking a dress on her body, and it's just not that it's nothing special, but she treats it as an ordinary action. And I love that magic is just so baked into
and it's kind of
story.
A mischievous action. She knows she's like, her mother doesn't want her to do it. She's kind of getting away. She's looking around and making sure. And I mean, having that moment where like maybe the dress wasn't exactly the way that she wanted it, so she was just going to like play around with it a little bit, which that was a great that was not the original opening, and I kind of like that kind of came to me. And I thought it worked really well as a description of kind of what her magic abilities were at the beginning. So it served a couple purposes.
That's just what I was going to ask, because the Paris scene where the circus appears for the first time feels like it could be a beginning also. So do you know generally sort of where you're going to start, or do things move around a lot?
Well, my original opening was a scene where Cecile, Esme, and Sylvie are leaving the circus. So the original prologue was that they were kind of coming out into the night from the circus. And my editor wanted to start with Laura, and rather than the circus, because she felt it was a little dizzying. And I mean, I think that was a fine choice. I ended up not using that original scene at all anywhere. And I think, just starting with Laura kind of gets you anchored with her from the beginning, rather than starting with something you're not quite sure. I like that ending. I thought, the only thing it made me do is that you have to wait a little bit to get into Cecile's journals, and that kind of transported you immediately right there. But I probably could have started it 2 or 3 different ways, and it's just like, you could be futzing with it forever. And I'm very happy with with the beginning, because I think it does kind of like, the ending should have been the tension before the wedding, and then what happens with the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
That the groom does not show up. And and her mother isn't surprised, really.
Right.
And
yeah, it's interesting to see.
Yeah.
Right.
Not for the reasons you think, not because he's like, but because like something may kind of happen before.
Nefarious things going on.
Yeah.
Multiple timelines are tough. They sort of exponentially they magnify the problems that you have to solve as an author, but I like them so much. That's, like you mentioned, The Magician's Lie, it's got that tension, and you have to pick where you're going to start, and you have to keep up the tension of switching back and forth between these different points of view and these different times, and try to bring the reader along with you. So anchor
Well,
them
and
in
that was
something.
such a great, I mean, you're beginning, I mean, even just, having her, taught, locked to a chair in a, in a jail cell, and and having to tell her tale. I mean, it was just the added pressure there, I think, was to kind of, like have the confessional kind of as she's doing that and keeping
Mhm.
that, kind of going, which was, mine had more of a narrative that kind of like, flowed through a period of time. Yours was like a few hours to have to get that all in, which was
Mhm.
very, very cool.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first image that came to me when I decided I was going to write about, this female magician who cuts men in half, and to have her start, in that police station with the small town policeman. She's handcuffed to a chair and he's standing there in his uniform, and he appears to have all the power and she appears to have none of it. And then the deeper you get into the book, the less true that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. um, so yeah. I have so many questions I want to ask. And for those of you in the audience, I see people have already started asking questions in the Q&A, and we will definitely segue into answering some of those, but definitely feel free to put questions in there, the whole time. I'm just going to ask a few more things, and we're going to talk about a few more things that we both want to talk about. So how would you describe the genre that you write in? Is it historical fantasy? Do you like to call it historical fiction? And I know sometimes our publishers like us to call things something different, but how do you think of it?
It's romantic historical fantasy, I think, is I would say this one kind of veered a little bit more toward dark fantasy a little bit. I mean, there are elements of it, certainly given some of the identities as you find out, like who folks are. I think, it kind of veered a little bit into dark fantasy, but for the most part, like, both Ladies of the Secret Circus and A Witch in Time, I think, were romantic historical fantasy. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
And did you sort of come to that easily, or was that sort of a process for you figuring out where you wanted to be writing, what you
I
wanted to
didn't
be
really
writing?
so I started off I'll probably back up a little bit then. I mean, I started off writing, going to the writer's center. We're local. So, I would go to work in the morning, and then at night I would go to the writer's center and I would take various classes there on short fiction, or just to kind of keep the workshop setting going for me. I had enjoyed that in both my bachelor's and my master's degree. And I wanted to kind of keep going with that and have a supportive community and just kind of be accountable, I think,
Mm,
to my writing. And even when, there were years, it just, I mean, I had things going on, and work was really good. I got married, there were just things that were very, that kind of life just kind of stepped in the way of my writing. But I always kind of kept it going. And I decided I was kind of done with short stories. And I don't really care for this. I'm not a great short story writer, I think is probably the case. And so I wanted to try my hand at writing a novel. And it took me probably 7 or 8 years to just really work on this novel. And it was a rural noir book. It was kind of like a
mm,
Donald Ray Pollock kind of mystery set in a small town. And I worked on that for a long time, finally got it polished, finished it with National Novel Writing Month, polished it at the Writers Center, and then sent it out and got an agent, Sandra Dykstra, Ross Foster at Sandra Dykstra. And I thought, okay, I'm good. My book's going to get published, and that's the way that it is, and it's great. And my book failed to sell, and I didn't know that, and it was just devastating because here I had been working full time, trying to write this for 8 years, and then I had this second book that I had just been playing around with, and it was strangely fantastical. And originally, I had A Witch in Time as a deathbed confessional. And I had sent this to my agent, and afterwards she said, "Well, I'm not gonna the book. I'm gonna stop it from we're not gonna go on with it because I think that I can get you better a better house, and so like we're just gonna hold this as not the book for you. Go write another book." And she saw, I think, potential in my career that I didn't necessarily see at the time. And she said, "Oh, that other thing that you gave me, by the way, that's really good. Go work on that." And, I licked my wounds for about like 3 or 4 months, and I just didn't write. And I was just in despair. And I thought, well, I'm going to take up skiing or tennis or something, and go have a life. And she called and she said, "So where is that? When are you turning that in?" And I'm just kind of like, "Give me a deadline and I'm just going to and I said, "Oh, 5 months from now, I'll get it to you in September." And I was like, crap, I didn't have anything. So I started to write, turned it in September to her. And my beta readers on that book, which would be A Witch in Time, started saying things like they couldn't put it down. I hadn't had that with my other book. And so I do think, in answer to your question, I switched from a close, gritty rural noir into fantasy. And I do feel like my writing came alive. It was like exactly the spark that was missing in me as a writer, because I love the idea of a problem, but then you add a fantastical element and it just kind of magnifies it. And I love that about the first two, and the third book that I'm working on right now, I'll have that same thing. So I think that that's just kind of what I gravitate toward.
Yeah, I think it's important for writers whose goal is publication, or writers who want to reach readers, to hear stories like that. And my story is actually not that dissimilar. I wrote a book, got an agent, book didn't sell. Okay.
Okay. No one
Wrote
talks
another
about
book,
that.
got
Yeah.
another agent. Yeah, we need to talk about this. So wrote another book, got another agent. That book didn't sell. So it really, I had been writing contemporary and then just switched to historical fiction, and didn't even really mean to write historical fiction.
Right.
I just wanted to write about a female magician who cuts men in half. And you could write that as a contemporary story, but then you're Vegas and you're Penn and Teller. And I could have, when I started researching it, the first professional female illusionist who did make cutting a man in half the trademark illusion of her act was in the 1980s. I'm like, well, do I want to write a book set in the 1980s? I think not. So I had to go back and look, and I wanted to write about a time where an illusionist could make headlines. And that's pretty far back. So then I'm like, okay, where's the sweet spot in the golden age of vaudeville? And I stumbled
Yeah.
across the idea of Adelaide Herman, who was a real female illusionist of the period, and does the scene that you see in The Magician's Lie, where she does the bullet catch on the stage in the Metropolitan
Yeah.
Opera House in New York in 1897. That happened. I'm like, okay, got it. 1897. What is 1897 like? Did they have phones? I don't know. I just had to learn the history to make
Yeah.
the historical fiction, and to take, the reader with me. And that's what I love most about historical, is just taking the reader with us to these different time periods.
I love that. Yeah. And solving problems in a way, like you kind of have like, I would construct a timeline and everything, and then I would be given this like thing. It would be like, and that happened exactly in the same time. I'm like, oh wow, like doors just start to open for you with history. And my first, I mean, I didn't realize what I had like kind of bitten off with my first book, and that I had four timelines.
Oh well, yeah.
And yeah, and I wanted that. I had really fallen in love with Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, in the
Mm.
fact that I thought that he really, like, you were in those time periods, and I wanted to try and see if I could do that. Could the sound of each of those be like different? So you had that kind of snappy dialogue of the 30s. I don't know if people talk that way, but like I think people think that people talk that way in the 30s. And then you had this kind of like more flowery Belle Epoque type of like language, and more formal, and in France in 1897. And so yeah, just like you, I mean, I didn't necessarily mean to do that. It's just I also realized what I was actually reading and what I was actually watching. I'm a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. I love Supernatural, Sabrina, Anne Rice. I mean, I grew up reading Anne Rice books, and yet, like, I'm like, why was I trying to fit myself into writing something that, I mean, I liked it, but that's not really what gave me joy. Historical novels also really gave me joy. So just like you, I think it's just like it. I don't know if you were reading historical novels, but I like Nicola Cornick and things. I mean, I really love to just settle into a book like that. I'm like, well, then why don't you write it? And that just weirdly had not occurred to me.
Yeah, I think,
Oh, slow.
well, writing the book you want to read is, it's a moving target. You
Right.
might be interested in something different at different times, and people might, push you in one direction or another. When I had a critique group when I was living in New York, everybody had really different genres. There's like a nautical fiction guy, and a sci-fi guy, and a paranormal romance woman. And I think you feel the pull of those different genres if you get in the nitty gritty of it that way. But I went to an MFA program, and MFA is all like, ooh, literary is the only way to go. And surprise, literary is not the only way to go. And literary is itself a genre.
Right.
So I hear people saying, don't don't write genre, write literary. Well, literary has its conventions the same way that sci-fi does, or that fantasy does, or any of these other things. But yeah, part of what I want to do with my books is bring people joy and sweep them
Yeah.
away. And so
Yeah.
fantasy is a great way to do that. Historical is a great way to do that. And so, yeah, sort of finding ourselves and finding our groove
Yeah,
is
and I'm
a
pretty
great thing.
committed to this for like at least the next 3 books. You know, like I'm
Mhm.
really committed to this type of like, you know, and I see the next 3 books in my head, and they're very much in this space.
Yeah, let's talk about what's coming next. I've got 5 minutes or more of
Mhm.
questions, just the two
Yeah,
of us, and then I'm going to open it up
yeah,
and start
yeah, yeah.
talking Q&A. But I want to make sure that we talk about what's coming next for you, so that people get to know that.
Yeah, so my next book is takes place on the set of a French New Wave horror film set in 1967. And there's an actress, and she's, you know, she has this musician boyfriend, and and he's like, you know, driving her crazy, and she decides she's going to take this role and go to the country, not unlike Jane Fonda did for Spirits of the Dead, and you know, and she heads out to the you know the French countryside to film this what is like a dark shadows kind of horror film, and finds herself in her horror film, like finds herself, you know, and she becomes like, so that's how you get into the, you know, I wanted, you know, historical uh fiction as well in that. And so, you know, she's basically understands the outcome and finds herself kind of trapped in her own film. And then you find a documentary filmmaker years later who is trying to, you know, do a documentary film on her, and when he peers through the camera, he sees her in her other time. And so it's like, you know, so it's got like romance and things like that. And so I'm you know, I'm busy working on that now. I'm one of the few people I think I actually like to talk about what I'm writing, because it kind of again holds me accountable. Like people are very
Yeah.
serious. I'm like, I'm just not as secretive about that. I like one, because like, and people will give you like, people like, oh, have you thought about this or that? And I'll be like, hadn't thought about that. Good call, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, so
First of all, that sounds amazing. I'm super excited. Sign me up to read that. And second of all, yeah, like I'm not worried about dissipating the magic by talking about the
yeah,
next thing.
yeah,
It's what's coming next. Especially if I'm under contract for it. I'm like, oh yes, it's
exactly.
happening.
Yes,
Whether I feel like it or not, it's happening. And the Arctic Fury was very much like under deadline pressure. Like I had to research and write at the same time, which I hate to do, but it had to be done
I'm doing
because
that
the book
right
was due.
now as well.
Yeah.
But
You
I mean,
prefer
I
to
like looked
separate
up
them?
a little bit, you know. I mean, but you know, again, I just, you know, I honor deadlines, and you do what you got to do to get it done. The Arctic Fury, though, I kept like looking people up, like thinking they were real, you know, and you know, and it was like, you did such a great job. That was just, you know, it was really transporting.
Thanks.
And to bite off the Arctic, I was like, wow, I couldn't have like the maps and the, you know, the woman who did the maps and the women, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, it was like, it was just really brilliant.
Oh, it was just so much. It was so much research compared to, I mean, all of my books are a lot of research, but this one was like so much research, like just tape flags, keeping 3M
Me
in
too.
business,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
constantly,
And I'm just really
constantly
like,
reading.
what made you think of the Arctic? Like you know, I mean, like what drew you to that? Like that's fascinating.
It was just kind of an out there idea that I didn't, I hadn't seen a lot of things set in the Arctic. And I
Oh,
read one book that I love is The Voyage of the Narwhal by Andrea Barrett. It's really good.
oh
And it's
yeah.
about somebody who goes in search of the Franklin expedition. It's
Yeah.
a fictional character, but it's based
Yeah.
on the real Franklin expedition. And I loved it, but it's much more typical of the time with its female characters that they were
Yeah.
sort of waiting around for the guys to come home. And I'm like, well, what if they didn't just wait
Yeah.
around?
Yeah.
And
But I
Lady
love the
Jane Franklin.
secrecy of it, you know, like the
Yes.
secrecy of it. Like they didn't really, yeah. I mean, it was really brilliantly plotted, and it was just great. So,
Thank
and
you. I
people like
can't.
go, yeah, people are always like, how do you pick what you do? And it's like, sometimes it's just like you either want to explore a
Mhm.
time or you're passionate about a time. For me, like Hollywood, the 1930s, was very passionate about. I love France as a setting. I'm just very much a Francophile. And so, you know, like the Lost Generation, I kind of thought was like the next step after A Witch in Time. And I was really fascinated with that period of time for, you know,
Mhm.
for the historical part of Ladies of the Secret Circus.
Right, right. Yeah, my historical sort of tends to fall in this sweet spot between 1850 and 1905. I feel,
Uh-huh.
and in America,
Yeah.
it just seems like I keep getting drawn
Yeah.
back and back and back so far to these sort of, um, you know, frontier areas and stuff like that. But my next book is a complete shift. So I haven't done many fantastical elements. Like the Magician's Lie has a fantastical element in it, but it's mostly realistic. And everything since then has been very realistic. But I got an idea and I talked to my agent about it. I'm like, what if I started doing this? She's like, go for it. It sounds like you really want to.
Great.
So in terms of that writing the book that you want to read, my next book is the start of a series, epic fantasy. The shorthand, we're sort of calling it, it's kind of a matriarchal Game of Thrones. So it's a big epic fantasy, swords and sorcery and all that good stuff. So the Five Queendoms series will be starting in 2022.
Yeah, you know,
so
wow,
totally different.
That's great though. I mean, that's like, that intimidates me. I couldn't, I mean, I'm in awe. I couldn't do that. I mean, yeah, like the swords and stuff. I'm just not, you know, I do kind of have that kind of fantasy that there is like kind of a grounding in this universe. It's just a little bit more, you know, like witches and ghosts and, you know, I haven't done vampires yet, but there's still time.
Yeah, exactly. There's always time for vampires. And it's cranking these different dials up and down, right? It's like this heavily fantasy versus, you know, heavily practical, and you can sort of play with the different things. But yeah, I'm learning a lot about swords. But, you know, similar to what you do, I had to define a magic system and say, okay, it's not that I don't have to follow rules anymore in fantasy, the way that I have to follow rules in historical. Because you will get emails if you do not get a historical detail right. And,
I have.
Yes, many emails. But in fantasy, you make up the rules, but then you have to follow them. So you'll still get emails, but they'll be about things that you made up. So I'm looking forward to that next year.
That's great. Oh my gosh. We have questions, huh?
We do. Yeah. Let me go ahead. I was curious. I wanted to ask this one about, can you talk about your process, which we've talked some, and whether you consider your audience while you write? Is there a person, do you have like an ideal reader that you hope reads this book?
It's so funny. After A Witch in Time, there was this wonderful writer, or this wonderful reader who posted on Goodreads, and just like when you have a reader who writes about your book in a way that you hadn't even thought about, like I was like, wow, like it really moved me. I've always had her in my head because I don't want to disappoint her. You know, like she just really, like it spoke to her, and she said like, this is what I was trying to do. And I was like, wow, like I guess I was trying to, but like she almost like captured the book better than I could capture what the book was about. And I always have her in my head. And I always, like I said, I want to make sure that the next book does not disappoint her. And I don't think it did. She actually communicates with me, and she was just like, I really love the second book. And so she's always in my head about like, you know, just trying to not disappoint people. I do think that I tend to write my books. I hear they are kind of thrillers in a way. And that has the audience in mind, so that it's not slow. Like I don't want to lumber on through a book, you know, and I don't want to, so I do like to have that through narrative, or that person that takes you through both books had that, where you have a modern day person that kind of walks you through this fantastical element, regardless of whether it's time or another dimension. And I think that's having the reader in mind, just so that they feel that they're like, it's like knitted together in a way. So yes, I think I definitely always have, and I listen very closely to my beta readers. If they don't like stuff, it's out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, collaborate, like other people's opinions, to me at a certain point in the process, I don't want to hear it, but at a certain point in the process, it's so necessary. Like I don't know if the book is any good or not until I give it to several someones. And then I don't take all of their advice, but I get, you know, oh, these two people saw a pattern. Yeah, they're right. It's a little slow there. I need to do something different. And outside eyes, the only other way that I can do it is just putting it aside for like 6 months.
Yeah,
and I don't generally have 6 months.
You are a new person coming back to it. It's like, well, yeah, my sister is one of my big readers, and the writer A.X. Ahmad is the other one. And I love it. We just have known each other long enough that he just will come back and he'll be like, throw that out, get that. I mean, he just, structure is what he just looks at. And he just, I mean, I listen to him. Like he's got really good instincts, both he and my sister. And so I tend to like listen to everything they tell me to do. I generally, like, I might be resistant to it at first. I'll walk around with it for a while and I'm like, darn, they are right. You know, so.
So mad, but I'm glad at the same time.
But it ultimately makes it a better book. because they're seeing holes in something that I haven't seen. And so, or I'll be like, is this what my sister's really good with voice. She knows what I'm trying to do and whether or not that's like coming through or it's falling flat. So I trust her completely on that.
This is a great question. Has your familiarity with opera informed or influenced your storytelling or writing in any way?
Well, yes. More so. So in A Witch in Time, she was a classical piano player, and when I started going to college. My first major in college was music with an opera, with an idea for vocal performance. You must be able to play the piano. I was a very good singer. I was a terrible piano player. And so I studied piano for 14 years so that I would be able to be competent enough to be able to do the things that you have to do as a singer. I actually, I think that, when I went to college, I actually switched my major and didn't tell my parents to English and never looked back. Weirdly, it was the piano that stuck with me then, oddly, more than the opera. If that's, and I can definitely, like all of the, all of the systems and all of the, composers and the colliatoras and the lyric and the mezzos and the, all of that, which is really, I just haven't used that yet. Maybe I will use that. That could be like a good, but the piano is definitely something that stuck with me just because I found it hard. And I struggled with it. So it was something that I actually gave to the writer. And I thought it was a nice through point for Witch in Time that they were all piano players. So.
I only know one other author who is a trained opera singer, classically trained opera, is Kate Quinn, who wrote the Alice Network.
Yeah.
Because I heard her sing the national anthem at a book event.
Oh, wow.
Which generally as authors is not something that we're asked to do.
So. No, it's not. Yeah, no.
Good. All right. We've got a question about the authors who first got you interested in reading and writing when you were young, and was Beverly Cleary among them? I believe that she passed today, and her obituary is out there. So that's probably where that question is stemming from. But do you have particular authors who sort of inspired you and got you into reading and writing in the first place?
I definitely started off, reading, as a kid, I was a bookmobile freak. I would, go and read, leave with stacks from our, Nancy Drews and the Trixie Beldens and everything, like Victoria Holtz. And, I think probably the biggest inspiration for me though, was Anne Rice, and was her Mayfair Witches. That was a big, for me, that was I would wait for every single book that she had. I met her. She told me she loved my name. I was always looking to see if Constance would appear as a character. And I would go to New Orleans all the time with with an attempt to try to just the romance of that after her. So she was very influential for me. Obviously, David Mitchell, Susanna Clark, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that book is a masterpiece. And so, those have been probably my biggest influences.
We've got a question that's in the chat, but I think it's interesting because you said what the next 3 books are, but are they all standalones?
No,
or are you starting a series?
In fact, I think I've had, people have reached out to me about the Witch in Time, the fact that Luke's story needs to be told, which is the hero of he's a demon, but and I agree with that. And so I have an idea in my head about how to do that, and so I'm starting to work through that. And, I could see this book even having a second. I don't know that I want like a series or trilogy, but I do think that sometimes I do leave the door open for a second pass at this. I like even these characters from, Ladies of the Secret Circus. Esme as a character, I think that deserves her own book, and she's fascinating. And this and the structure of hell that I have set up. It's not unlike, my demons and my devils and things have this kind of Lord Byron kind of Byronic kind of they're glamorous, romantic, Victorian types of characters. And I could just definitely see, them coming back for something, because I think they're rather interesting. The family that I've built is rather interesting. I think.
You
I
could,
mean, so.
so you could write a linked novel or linger
A
in that
linked
world
novel,
longer.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think so.
something else in the that
Yeah,
takes place in the same universe
yeah, I'm totally
as
open
that.
to that, and like, and things just noodle with me for a while. They have to sit there for a while, and then I'll start to figure them out.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's good.
I don't know if
That's
you do
good.
that too, but it's just like it has to sit with me for a little bit.
Yeah, there are some things that I've sort of thought about. I actually almost wrote after the after The Magician's Lie, I proposed two books to my editor, and one of them ended up being Girl in Disguise, which is about the first
Yeah,
female private detective in the US and based on a real person, extremely realistic, chronological,
yeah,
because I was so tired of
yeah,
hopping around hopping around in timelines, and Magician's Lie took me so long to get right because of all of that complexity. I'm like, nope, I'm just writing. It's going to
yeah.
start and then it's going to go forward and then it's going to stop when I'm done. So that's what Girl in Disguise does. And then later on, I have 13 points of view in the Arctic Fury. So you see that I
Oh,
didn't
you
really
do. I know.
stick
Yes,
to, yeah,
exactly.
didn't really stick
You have
to
all the
my
women in the
my
front of the
plans.
courtyard, the
Oh my
courtroom, and you
gosh,
got
yeah,
it's amazing. Yes.
it's a lot of keeping track of different people. But the other book that I was thinking about writing after The Magician's Lie focuses exclusively on Adelaide Herman, because I got my hands on her memoir, which I don't believe like
Yeah,
90% of, but it's a great story. And it would really make great fiction. So
yeah,
they didn't want me to write another book about a female magician quite yet at that time,
yeah,
but I'm not ruling it out because she really did have an amazing life. And she was like riding on horseback in Mexico, fleeing bandits in like the 1880s, and seems like it would be a really good sort of adventure story, which is sort
yeah,
of what the Arctic Fury is. So maybe
yeah.
going
Oh,
on
it's yeah.
into that zone after I write at least three books of epic
You're gonna be
fantasy.
busy.
I'm going to be pretty busy.
You're
Yeah,
gonna be
it's
busy.
crazy. Which actually leads perfectly into one of these questions. First of all, an attendee who hasn't read the book yet, excited to get started, but loved A Witch in Time,
Thank you.
and says, how do you write these books while still having a day job?
Yeah. Um, so today, can I just tell you? So, I today there was a meeting at 3:15, which is a very weird time to have a meeting. I'm like, whatever. I don't even have makeup on. I'm like, with my boss, and I get onto the we use like Google Meets or whatever. I get onto the thing, and there are 100 people, and it was a surprise book event for me. I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
seriously, what have y'all? And I have notes for this meeting. I'm taking this meeting seriously. And anyway, very sweet. I mean, I have a really supportive, great group of people that I work with, or I could not have done that because there are times I have to, like, if I'm on a first pass page kind of crunch, I got to take a week off. And they're very understanding and they're very supportive. In fact, not even beyond understanding, they're incredibly supportive. Um, when I am in writing mode, I learned this from National Novel Writing Month. It changed me fundamentally forever, which is that I will write in National Novel Writing Month. You have to write 1,600 words a day to hit your 50,000 target. When I'm in a writing mode, I write 1,000 words a day. I'm going to start that, and that is, I can be doing research. I don't prefer it, research and writing at the same time, but it doesn't matter. I just get the like 60,000 words down for like a good rough first draft. Then I start going through, but I have to tell you, I fight with myself. For me, it's that first draft while I'm working that it's a battle with myself. And both books have been that way. Yeah, because you just want to give up, and it's just like I don't know. Especially with historical aspect, I'm like, oh God, I got to figure that out next. And you're like, where do I find that information out? And it's been harder because many times if I were feeling a little sunk in that, I would get on a plane and go to Paris. And well, that'll solve anything because you come back with like
Because then you're in
5 yeah,
Paris.
you come back with 5 pages of notes and photos and things like that, and that would be a jumping off point for me. Well, I don't have that now. And so, like it does just take pure painful discipline, which I did probably learn as a singer and as a piano player. You sit down and you write, and some days it kills me to get 500 words out, and I'll sit there for like 3 hours. Some days I'll sit down at that, and I will write 3,000 words. So, it's just the showing up and the sitting down and not being afraid of your, like, for a while, if I'm like not really sure what to do with something, I'm kind of afraid of it. And you're like, oh, and you just can't. You got to sit down. A lot of times what I'll do is, to trick myself, is I will start to read. Well, then I'm always like futzing. Then that starts to open up. It's almost like just like, like stretching before you run. And, I'll trick, cajole, reward, whatever it is, to get myself to get that first draft. Then after that, I have something, I'm less intimidated, and then I can start through. And I don't know if that's your process, but and then I'm doing more historical research the whole time. And it just takes discipline. And I actually think the second book, I didn't have my normal process. I had 6 months to write it. I was like, it's due when, like, or I consulted my contract, like, what? And, and I was just talking to my boyfriend today, and he said, well, sometimes you do your best work when you are on a serious deadline. And I just did that. So, you can do amazing things, I think, when you are forced to.
I think that's what I find. I've done NaNoWriMo a few times, and it does help, because you don't sit around and wait for inspiration. You're like, if I don't write 1,667 words today, I am going to have to write 2,667 words tomorrow, and I can't. So you just gotta do it. And I'm not a write every day. Yeah. Yes. You're writing something. Comes. Yeah. And it may not, you may not be writing something great, but you're writing something. And I'm very much the same sort of get the first draft down and then go back and fix it. I like the first draft. I like I call it fondly first draft trash.
Yeah.
And it's just, you write and write and write and write to get the words to fix. So I know that it's not the right stuff that's coming out, but every time I write a book, I ruin it by writing it down, because it's perfect in my head. It's not going to be perfect on the page. It may never be perfect on the page, but it will at least be moving toward perfect once it exists. And once I start cycling through my, this revision and then that revision and then another revision and then beta readers and then more revision.
I think I'm a better editor than I am a writer. And what that does is, so my first draft's terrible, and then I've got a good eye, and I go back and back and back and back and layer, like a painter layers. But you gotta just, and by the time I'm done, and I don't know about you, but I've been probably through like 12 edits by the time I'm done. And, it's, because at some point your editor kicks in, and then and then proofreading kicks in, and, all that stuff. And you do at least 3 or 4 passes with them. So, yeah.
And I used to be afraid of having to throw stuff out, but now throwing stuff out or setting stuff aside is just such a part of my process. I don't worry about it anymore. So a 100,000 word book might have written 150,000 words, but that's okay, because I needed to write the 50 to get to the right 100. And The Magician's Lie was definitely a victim of that, because there was an entire character that I still miss. Her name was Lulu. She was an aerialist. And she was originally the reason that Arden went to Chicago.
Okay.
And so when my agent was reading the book before we sold it, she's like, Lulu serves no purpose. Lulu's got to go. I'm like, but I love Lulu. She's so great. She's like, got to go. And I, stomped around for a few days. And like you were talking about with your beta readers, stomped around, go, ah, darn it, she's right.
She's right.
So Lulu's gone. But having Lulu get her to Chicago made me think, oh, okay, yeah, she should go to Chicago at this point in the story. And this is what should happen. And this is, what happens in the Iroquois Theater, which actually dovetails in perfectly with it. And that's a real historical event that I was then able to fold in. And I have Lulu to thank for it, even though she's not around anymore. So maybe she'll go into the Adelaide Herman book. If I ever get around to writing that.
Do you plot or do you pants? Are you a plotter or a pantser? Or are you?
I plot and I write
the tables outlines. On you.
Yes. I write outlines, and I always have a synopsis, and I have an outline, and I start following it, and then I chuck it like halfway through, because it serves a purpose to get me started. But then it starts working against me, and things go in directions that I didn't mean them to go. And I write out of order. I don't know about you, but I just write plunk down scenes and dialogue and stuff like that. Or I might just sit down and write a scene that's nothing but dialogue, and then go back 2 days later and write, the stage direction part of it.
Me too.
But I can't, if I'm going to be doing like a nano style volume of words. It's got to be whatever's working for me today. I guess that's where the inspiration comes. Today I'm inspired to like finish this darn scene.
Yeah, and then
or
you have what I call like bridge chapters. Like I'll have like these chapters, this chapter, this chapter, and then it's like a chapter that has to kind of like get you from point A to point B. And you're like, ugh, I got to write that. And you sit down, and that comes like a little bit, like after you do your fun chapters and like your kind of your key milestone chapters and things. But I'll do, a synopsis, like 3 or 4 pages, and I literally will cut out the paragraphs, stick them in the chapter heads, knowing that that's what I have to accomplish in that. And then like you, I'll be like, ooh, today I feel like, going to, like in the case of Ladies of the Secret Circus, I'll be like, today I'm going to, have her in the Père Lachaise going to see Jim Morrison's grave. And then I'll work on that. Where the day before I might have been back in Carrigan Falls, which by the way, for all you Washingtonians, does not exist. And it's a mashup of Culpeper and Middleburg. And, so I definitely, just like you, go back and forth. Love that, actually, because then my mind kind of like jumps like a jackrabbit.
This question is really related. So as you are writing, are there things that your characters do that surprise you? So sort of, I don't know if that's quite what we talked about, but yeah, how much of it comes from your characters and how much of it are you bringing that, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, and how much of it is a character just manifesting herself on the page? Characters
definitely manifest. There is little doubt about that. And a lot of times too, I'll have a character that in the page is kind of flat and in my outline. So like Edward Binghamton Barrow is a minor, what I had envisioned him being a much more minor character. Just was the stopping point that she gets on an airplane, she goes to Paris about this painting that she has, which is the Ladies of the Secret Circus, one of the ladies. And he was supposed to be a minor character. As I began to write his dialogue and put myself in his shoes, he became, he had a lifetime quest of trying to find out about these paintings. She's having a quest of trying to find answers, but they're actually dovetailing. And so in a way, he begins to play a much more integral role for her, to the point where he's almost the yin to her yang. And I really love, and that came out of nowhere. And he leapt off the page and demanded to kind of have the space that he did. And you let that's the magic of writing a book. Otherwise, if there's no magic, go write I would write a textbook. You know what I mean? Maybe those are magic too. I don't know, but I mean, for me, it's you start off with a pretty disciplined approach, but things have to surprise you, and that's part of the joy. That's I think part of what makes each book special. It's like what gifts kind of came to you, and also for Witch in Time, it was the whole Taos section, which is my favorite. My agent rejected that section at first and said it wasn't, it was set somewhere else. And so I rewrote that, and it ended up being, if you read A Witch in Time, there's a moment where that really jumps into something very, very different. And I fought very hard for that chapter, but that chapter came alive only, and the characters kind of came alive only then, So yeah, I think to your point, yeah, they sometimes just surprise you and come out of nowhere and change your perceptions of what you had originally thought the book was going to be.
Right. And like you're talking about working with your agent and editor and beta readers and other people, I think sometimes there's a perception on the part of writers that it's a very solo, very isolating sort of, I am the artist and I am making the art and here is my art and I'm going to have to fight to keep it. And I feel like that's not really the type of relationship that I have with either my agent or my editor. They're trying to help. They want to make the book better, but we're the authors. And so there are times when we take their suggestions and say, yes, that's going to make the book better. And there are times where they say, why don't you do this? And we think about it for a few days and go, no, that's not going to work.
Exactly. I think there is some kind of fireworks going off here. The dog.
Oh, goodness.
Nuts. So this is perfect. Yes. Yeah, no, I definitely think that is exactly what I have experienced as well. And, I just, again, that's the joy of the book and the joy of writing. And that was the biggest surprise. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about like really the process of writing a book until, the first one I kind of failed miserably at a little bit, but like the second, with The Witch in Time, it was a very special process. And I didn't know with book two, maybe I don't know how you feel, but book two, I was like, God, do I have book two in me? I didn't know, and the book two was like, by the seat of my pants, kind of like it, but it gave me more confidence. I think like for book three, it's like, okay, I know how to do this now. We were having a great discussion not too long about book two, and other writers were like, oh God, book two is just terrible, because you just have to like turn on a dime from promoting and like, woo, I got a book. And it's like, what? I got to like roll up my sleeves and do it again. And you like worry that you don't have the magic to do it again.
Every book is different, and every book, I'm always afraid it's my last good idea. Like the book that I'm writing now is the last good idea I'm ever going to have, and that can't be true because I've got like 83 other ideas in a file.
Well, clearly you do.
But at the same time, now I've got a series coming up. We're going to hand it back over in just a couple of minutes to the wonderful people at Politics and Prose. And I want to thank them really quickly, Beth and Allison and the rest of the team. Thank you so much for hosting today. We've got two questions that are kind of the same question. So this will be the last question that I ask, but it's a great question. Can you provide some advice about writing, or what can you teach me about writing? We don't know what you know, so we don't know if it's new or not, but some advice. Do you have a tip, Constance, like something that you would say to a writer who is working to better their craft and wants to get to where you are?
My advice is the first 50 I used to agonize over my first 50 pages, and I think you've heard from both of us, it's the middle and beyond. You got to finish. You got to have, you don't even know what the beginning, you heard me talking earlier about how I switched out the beginning, but I would agonize and see so many people agonizing about their first 50 pages. And it's like, okay, there's time for that. But when you don't have the rest of the book, quit polishing and quit spinning, because you're only polishing and spinning. So make sure you've got a bare bones, even crappy, full, first draft. Then you're going to know what the book is about. Then the beginning makes sense. I don't know if you feel that way. I think we just kind of both said that in a, but like, your first 50 pages are not precious until an editor tells you they're precious.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think that people can spend a lot of time. They think that it has to be perfect before they move on. And some people write that way, but 90% of the writers I know would rather have a complete bad draft than a perfect 50 pages. And you might end up throwing out those 50 pages. Maybe you didn't need them in the first place. Maybe that was just the throat clearing to get to the really interesting event. And you say, okay, well, the rest is backstory, and you think you have to fold it in, but then it turns out you didn't need it at all. Yeah. So I don't spend a lot of time polishing, and I won't even do the research that I need. Like in Girl in Disguise, 1850s Chicago, there's a scene where, somebody needs to walk out of a building and go 6 blocks up and 2 blocks over. And I knew that eventually I would need to find out what those streets were called and look at a map, because somebody would tell me that I was wrong if I got it wrong. So, but I didn't do that research until the book was written, and I knew that scene was going to stay in the book.
Right.
Because I didn't have that. You
got to be economical. So, you got to be economical. And another thing, just, we both did not get books public. We both had a lot, a lot of rejection. And I think that you've got to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you have a point of view and a story to tell, because a lot of people are going to want to tell you no.
That's right. Don't give up. You are the only person who can make it so that you definitely never succeed. Other people will push you in their various directions, but persistence, it's so important.
Absolutely. I see Allison has joined us again.
Welcome back, Allison.
Well, thank you both. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up by asking you both one last question. We are in the business of selling books, and so we always love to know what everyone is reading right now. So could you both tell us either what you're reading right now, or a book that you've finished recently that you would recommend to our listeners?
I just ordered The Red Widow from the wonderful and amazing Elma Katsu, and who I owe so much to. And I can't wait to see, this is a little different from her. She did The Hunger, which was about the Donner Party, which Greer, and The Deep, which was about the Titanic. And so this is a little departure for her. It's a spy novel, so I can't wait.
And I have a copy of that downstairs as well. That is my next book that I'm going to start reading. But right now I'm reading Genevieve Gornichek's The Witch's Heart, which I think might appeal to the fantasy loving, historical loving audience. And it's a retelling of a character from Norse mythology. So you see, you know, Greek and Roman mythology all up and down, but Norse mythology, I think, is so much less covered. And she's really taken this character and moved her forward and made her central to telling her own story, which women in mythology don't always get to do. So it's called The Witch's Heart, Genevieve Gornichek.
Great, that's fabulous.
Great. I'm segueing a little. I'm on the Bridgerton train. I'm on the third book. So yeah.
Oh my God, no,
Yeah.
it's so great. Bridgerton. Oh,
yeah. Well, thank you both so much. And an extra special thank you to our audience. Your patronage is what enables us to bring us programming like this, bring this to you. And we can't continue to host these types of events without the book sales that come with them. So please support Constance and Greer and Politics and Prose by clicking on the links in the chat for both the ladies of the Secret Service. I did it. I said Secret Service. Secret Circus, as well as Greer's books and A Witch in Time. And check out our website for the most current and up-to-date event listings. And we have a great lineup to choose from. There's something for everyone. So we know you like fantasy and historical fiction if you're here, but